I felt more comfortable with my left hand there than I did my right. Then once I got started making a few, I just kept going. And some night it goes in, some night it don't. That night it happened to work out. But if I remember correctly, we won that game in overtime by like 1 point.
When you talk about Larry Bird, you're talking about pure, unfiltered competition wrapped in a 6-foot 9-inch frame. He wasn't flashy, but he didn't need to be. Bird combined grit, skill, and an iron will to win, and he brought all of it every single night. For 13 seasons, Bird turned basketball courts into battlefields where only the toughest survived. But don't mistake his calm look for kindness. He built his legacy through rivalries, pressure moments, and battles that pushed him to his limits. Bird didn't just show up to play, he showed up to fight for every inch of the court. And while he respected a lot of players, there were a few who stood out, a few who challenged him in ways others couldn't. Guys who matched his intensity, read his moves, took the hits, and gave them right back. These weren't enemies, they were something tougher. The ones who earned his respect because they made him work harder than anyone else ever did. Now, looking back at his legendary career, Bird reflects on the 6 warriors who pushed him hardest. The ones who didn't just play against Larry Bird, they went to war with him. These are the 6 toughest basketball players Larry Bird ever faced. Dennis Rodman didn't just play defense, he made it an art form of psychological warfare. He wasn't a scorer, he wasn't flashy, but what he did was far more dangerous. He never stopped. And to Larry Bird, that kind of constant pressure made Rodman one of the most exhausting opponents he ever faced. Back in the late 80s, Rodman was part of the Detroit Pistons, the team Bird probably had more wars with than anyone else. They weren't called the bad boys for fun. They were physical, they were dirty, and Rodman was their chaos engine. From 1987 to 1989, Bird and the Celtics faced Rodman's Pistons in 3 straight Eastern Conference Finals. 33 times they met on the court, and every single matchup was a battle of wills. Rodman played defense like it was personal. He studied players. He watched their footwork. He looked for the smallest habits, a shoulder twitch, a fake, a hesitation, and then used that to get in your face and stay there. Larry Bird wasn't rattled easily. He dealt with elbows, double teams, and trash talk throughout his entire career. But Rodman? Rodman was different. He didn't just defend you. He wore you down, mentally, physically, every possession. Years later, Rodman would admit how relentless his approach was. I would be all over him. But here's the thing about Bird. Even with Rodman draped all over him like a shadow, Larry would still be yelling at his teammates, "I'm open." That was Bird's confidence. That was his toughness. And if the defense wasn't enough, Rodman played mind games too. He'd talk, he'd stare, he'd bump you in dead ball moments just to get inside your head. He wasn't trying to fight you, he was trying to break your rhythm, and it worked. But here's the thing, Bird respected it. As much as he hated how exhausting Rodman was, he knew this relentless defender was special. Rodman was young, raw, but absolutely fearless. He didn't back down from anyone. Not even from a guy like Bird, who was a full-blown superstar by then. Their matchups were never pretty. It was hands-on jerseys, dives for loose balls, hard fouls, and that constant tension where both players were trying to outlast the other. And while Larry didn't always show it, deep down he understood something. Dennis Rodman didn't care about fame. He just wanted to make life miserable for you on the court, and he did exactly that. That's what made him one of the toughest players Larry Bird ever faced. Michael Cooper didn't look like much at first glance. Tall, wiry, quiet, not the kind of player who shouted for attention. But the moment the ball was tipped, he turned into a shadow you couldn't shake. And for Larry Bird, that shadow followed him through some of the toughest battles of his career. Cooper was the Lakers' defensive specialist during the peak of the Celtics-Lakers rivalry. Every time Boston and LA met, in the finals, regular season, or anywhere in between, Cooper's job was simple: make Larry Bird uncomfortable, and he did it better than almost anyone. He wasn't dirty, he wasn't loud, he was just smart. He moved his feet, read passing angles, studied your body language. Bird once described Cooper as being like a mosquito. No matter how many times you swatted, he was still there. That kind of constant presence wears on you. Every screen, every curl, every catch and shoot. Cooper was glued to him, contesting shots, crowding space, and never losing focus. It wasn't just physical defense either. Cooper had a knack for timing. He knew when to reach, when to back off, when to bait a bad pass. He forced Bird to think one step deeper every time down the floor. And in a league full of athletic defenders who relied on speed and power, Cooper relied on discipline, and that made him far more dangerous. Their duels weren't bloody or violent. They were technical, mental. Cooper would block a shot from behind, then sprint down the court like nothing happened. No celebration, no taunt, just back to work. That's the kind of quiet toughness Bird couldn't ignore. and the games meant more too. These weren't just regular season matchups. They were battles on the biggest stage, under the brightest lights, with championships on the line. Every point mattered. Every possession could swing momentum, and Cooper made sure that Bird had to earn every single bucket. Bird never came out and said he hated playing against Cooper, but he didn't need to. You could see it in his face. That frustration when Cooper forced a miss, when he chased down a loose ball, when he disrupted the rhythm, Bird thrived on. Most defenders tried to survive Bird. Cooper tried to beat him. That mindset alone made him stand out. And for Larry Bird, a player who prided himself on always finding a way, Michael Cooper was one of the rare few who forced him to dig even deeper. Because against Cooper, good wasn't good enough. You had to be perfect. Magic Johnson was the opposite of Larry Bird in almost every way. Flashy where Bird was plain, smiling where Bird was serious, fast and showy while Bird was slow and deliberate. But for all their differences, Magic was one of the few players who could match Bird not just in talent, but in intensity. And that's exactly what made him one of the toughest opponents Bird ever faced. Their rivalry started long before the NBA. In 1979, Magic's Michigan State team faced Bird's Indiana State squad in the NCAA championship, a game that drew one of the largest TV audiences in college basketball history. Magic won that day, 75-64, and from then on, they were tied together. Every finals matchup, every regular season game, every MVP race, Bird versus Magic became the defining battle of the 1980s. Over their entire careers, they faced each other 37 times, with Magic holding a 7-11 edge in their head-to-head battles. But it was their finals meetings that truly defined their rivalry. Magic didn't play the game to bully or intimidate, but that didn't make him soft. In fact, Bird admitted that Magic's toughness came from something else, his mind. He could control the tempo of a game, direct traffic like a general, and hit you with a no-look pass before you even realized he'd seen the opening. Bird called it mental speed, and said that playing against Magic felt like trying to solve a puzzle that kept changing shape. But there was also something else that got to Bird, Magic's energy, that constant smile, the way he celebrated after big plays. Bird didn't think it was fake, but in those early years, he found it irritating. "Nobody's that happy," Bird once said. And when that grin came after Magic had just picked apart the Celtics' defense or hit a clutch shot, it hit even harder. Yet underneath all that flash, Magic was as cold-blooded as they come. He didn't just want to win, he wanted to beat you at your best. And against Bird, he always raised his game. They pushed each other in ways few players ever could. Bird admitted that preparing for Magic meant watching extra tape, thinking 2 or 3 steps ahead, because Magic didn't play by the usual rules. He created plays out of nothing. He made average teammates look great, and in close games, he was fearless. Their finals battles became legendary. 84, 85, 87. Each one a 7-game war of adjustments, pride, and championship-level basketball. In 1984, with the Lakers trailing by 3 points in the final minute of Game 7, Magic had the ball with a chance to tie, but Dennis Johnson stripped him clean, sealing Boston's victory. Bird averaged 27 points and 14 rebounds in that series, but he knew Magic would be back, and he was winning the next 2 finals meetings between them. Through it all, Bird knew that no matter how well he played, Magic would bring just as much, maybe more. Over time, their rivalry turned into friendship. Mutual respect replaced tension. But those early matchups, they were fierce, they were draining, and they forced Bird to elevate every part of his game, mentally, emotionally, and physically. Magic didn't just challenge Bird on the court, he challenged his entire idea of what greatness looked like. And that made him one of the toughest players Larry Bird ever faced. Isiah Thomas wasn't the biggest guy on the court. He wasn't the strongest either, but none of that mattered, because when it came to toughness, Isiah had it in a way that was almost dangerous. And for Larry Bird, facing him was never just a game, it was a battle of survival. The Celtics and the Pistons hated each other in the late 80s. Their playoff matchups weren't just physical, they were emotional. You could feel the tension before the ball was even tipped. And right at the heart of it all was Isiah Thomas, leading the Detroit Bad Boys with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. Isiah played with this strange mix of control and chaos. One minute, he was slicing through defenders with a smooth crossover. The next, he was barking out plays, taking hard fouls, or getting tangled up in scrums. He could score 25 points and still feel like the most dangerous man on the court, not because of what he did with the ball, but because of how he set the tone. Bird respected skill, he respected fight, but what made Isiah different was how much he loved both. He wasn't afraid of contact. He wasn't scared to get in your face. And he didn't care who you were, superstar or rookie. If you were in his way, he was coming through you. One of the most famous moments in their rivalry came after a brutal playoff series. Isiah made a comment that Bird got more credit than he deserved because he was white. It lit a firestorm across the league. Bird didn't respond with more talk. He let his game do the talking. But the damage was done. That single comment added fuel to an already raging fire. From that point on, things weren't just competitive. They were personal. Isiah's Pistons built an entire defensive system around physicality and intimidation, and Bird felt that same brutal approach aimed at him. Every time he came off a screen, there was contact. Every drive came with a bump. Every loose ball was a wrestling match, and Isiah orchestrated it all. Fast, focused, and fearless. What made him so tough wasn't just his scoring or his passing. It was the way he handled pressure. He could take a hit, shake it off, and come right back harder. He never looked rattled, never showed fear. And even when Bird had big games, it never felt easy. Isiah had that rare ability to bring out the worst in his opponents, not because he played dirty, but because he never backed down, and he didn't care if you liked him or not. He played to win, and that was the part Bird understood best. They didn't need to be friends. They didn't even need to shake hands, because deep down, both of them knew the truth. There was no such thing as an easy game when Isiah Thomas was on the court, and that's exactly why he earned a place on this list. Dr. J, Julius Erving, was already a legend when Larry Bird entered the league. He had the afro, the smooth drives, the highlight dunks. He was the face of cool in basketball, but behind that graceful style was a competitor every bit as fierce as Bird, and that's what made their battles so intense and so personal. When Bird joined the NBA in 1979, Dr. J was the reigning king of the Eastern Conference. He had the respect, the reputation, and the spotlight. Bird didn't care about any of that. He wanted to win, and he wanted to go through the best to get there, and that meant going straight at Julius Erving. At first, the rivalry was quiet. Mutual respect, different personalities, not much trash talk, but it didn't stay that way for long, because as Boston started to rise and Bird's name began to eclipse even Erving's in the media, the tension started building. People were comparing them. Some said Bird was better, and for two ultra-competitive players, that was enough to turn respect into fire. The moment that defined it came in 1984, Celtics versus Sixers. Bird and Dr. J were going at it all game, bumping, jawing, trading buckets. Then, suddenly, it exploded. Both players got tangled up and ended up throwing punches. It wasn't just a scuffle, it was a full-on fight. Two legends, two Hall of Famers, fists flying in front of a shocked crowd. For Bird, that moment wasn't about ego, it was about sending a message. Dr. J wasn't going to push him around, and he wasn't going to back down, not from anyone. Especially not from a player everyone told him he should look up to. But even after that fight, there was no long-lasting hatred, because Bird respected what Dr. J stood for. He saw how hard Erving worked, how much pride he had in his game, and how much he carried himself like a leader. Erving didn't need to scream to get respect. He earned it with every step he took on the court. Their matchups were physical, yes, but also strategic. Erving would test Bird with speed and agility. Bird would answer with footwork and shot-making. It was like watching two masters play chess, except the pieces hit back. What made Dr. J one of the toughest for Bird wasn't just the talent. It was the pride, the quiet intensity, the refusal to be outdone. He wasn't trying to prove anything to the media. He was proving it to himself, that even as the new stars rose, he still belonged at the top. And for Larry Bird, beating Julius Erving wasn't just another win. It meant something more. Because to beat a player that good, one that strong, that smooth, that proud, you had to be at your absolute best. And that's why Dr. J makes this list, not as a rival to hate, but as a worthy opponent. Bird had to fight for every inch. Dominique Wilkins didn't have the rings. He didn't have the spotlight of LA or Boston. But if you stepped on the court thinking he was anything less than elite, you were in for a long, painful night. Larry Bird never made that mistake, because he knew exactly what Dominique brought: power, grace, and a killer instinct that made every matchup a war. There's one game, one night, that cemented Dominique's place on this list forever. Game 7, 1988 Eastern Conference Semifinals. Celtics versus Hawks. Bird versus Wilkins. Both men at the peak of their powers. The Garden shaking. Every possession felt like a heavyweight punch. Wilkins dropped 47 points that night. 47. He wasn't just hitting shot. He was floating through defenders, exploding at the rim, rising over double teams like they weren't even there. And every time he scored, he turned and ran back down the court with that same calm look. No celebration, no yelling, just business. Bird answered with 34 of his own, including 20 in the fourth quarter. It was one of the greatest duels in NBA history. Not just for the numbers, but for the attitude. Neither man backed down, neither blinked. They just kept going at each other like nothing else mattered. After the game, Bird said something that stuck. "That was the best game I've ever played, and it still might not have been enough." That's what Dominique did to him. That's how hard he pushed Larry Bird. Not with elbows or trash talk, but with pure, unfiltered greatness. And here's what made it even more special. Dominique never played dirty, never tried to get into Bird's head. He just played the game, hard, clean, and full throttle. And Bird respected that a lot. Because when you strip everything else away, the headlines, the rivalries, the noise, that's what real toughness looks like. Showing up, game after game, ready to go toe-to-toe with the best in the world, and never blinking. Dominique might not have beaten Bird that night, but he earned something just as important, a permanent spot in Larry Bird's mind as one of the absolute toughest he ever faced. These 6 players didn't just play against Larry Bird, they brought out the very best in him. They tested his limits, pushed his patience, and earned his respect in ways most never could. If you enjoyed this deep dive, hit that subscribe button. We've got more legends, more rivalries, and more untold stories coming your way.